Okay, let's go.
Going.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so we're going to discuss today, Bez Hashem, some of the halachos of Hatmanah, wrapping food from before or on Shabbos. Just first, by way of introduction, I want to discuss what we're not discussing. What we're not discussing are the more common halachas that we're common on a more common basis of how we properly set up a blech, making sure the food is properly cooked before Shabbos, or returning food to the blech on Shabbos if someone takes shalom for a night, how to return the shalom pot back to the fire. All those halachas are what we're not discussing. What we are going to be, Bez Hashem, discussing is particularly the halachas of what Chazal call Hatmanah, wrapping food. Just think back before the modern invention of all of our modern great appliances, and if they wanted to have challah on Shabbos morning before the crock pot or ovens that we have today, it was quite a challenge to figure out how you're going to keep the food hot the next morning. They didn't have a constant gas line running in to keep the fire fueled, or other instruments that we have today. So many people used to have some type of enwrapment. They used to wrap their food in different types of materials, and Chazal saw this as a reason to be gozer to make decrees on certain materials. So we're going to break up into two basic categories. We're going to have certain materials that you can use to insulate your foods, which actually are mosif hevel. They will increase the heat of the product they are enwrapping. It's hard for us to really get a good modern example of this. As we get along, we'll get some. But Chazal give us examples of, they used to use the pulp from olives, from sesame seeds. They used to use lime, sand, certain types of salt, different things that they would wrap around a pot, let's say, of challah before Shabbos, and they would actually increase the heat. There was to be some type of chemical reaction happening that they wouldn't just insulate like a towel would just insulate it. This would actually increase the heat and constantly pump in heat into the pot for a certain amount of time until that chemical reaction stopped working, I guess. And then you would have hot challah and presto Shabbos morning. So that's one type of Hatmanah we'll discuss. The second type of Hatmanah of wrapping that we're going to discuss is just wrapping a pot with a regular insulating material like a blanket or a towel or any other soft cotton type material or wool, where all you're doing is retaining and you're maintaining the current heat, but you're not trying to increase the heat of the product. So obviously the second type, where you're just maintaining heat, is going to last shorter, is not going to keep the food as hot as something that's going to be constantly increasing the heat. So why did Chazal ask for these various types of Hatmanah, and where exactly did they ask for it? So we're going to just, there's a lot of Gemaras about it. I just really just quoted one Gemara here just to get a basic sum up of these two categories. And this is the Gemara in the third parak of Shabbos, Daf Lamed Daled. And there, I'm just going to speak out most of the Gemara. Rava says the reason why we cannot wrap something on Shabbos, let's say Friday night, a person's blech, there's no fire on, and his chicken soup is getting, the wife realizes the husband's in shul still schmoozing after davening for some reason, and the soup's getting cold. She's worried to have cold chicken soup, and it's ready, an hour into Shabbos, so she wants to wrap the chicken soup completely in a towel, so it's just an insulating material, but it's not adding any heat, it's just keeping it warm. Chazal said it's usher once it's dark, once it's Shabbos. Why? Says Rava, Gezeira Shema Yarsiach. We're afraid that since now you're involved in keeping the food hot and keeping the food warm, if you're going to realize that your chicken soup, or whatever example is not hot enough, you're going to come to actually bring up the flame. You're going to actually come to ignite the flame because you're actively involved now in keeping the food warm. When you're just taking chicken soup out or whatever food you're taking out and you're serving it, so we're not afraid you're going to start to cook it or do anything because all you're doing is serving it. But here, where you're involved seriously in keeping it warm, you want to wrap up the chicken soup pot. That's going to be a problem because we're afraid that since you're in the mood now and you're in the active mindset of keeping food hot, you might come to be marsiach. You might come to bubble it up, and that'll be a problem of bishul or other concerns on Shabbos. That's one gezeras. This is purely rabbinic. The Chazal said it's usher because you might come to do a deraisa. The deraisa would be to cook or to ignite the flame. The next problem, Rava says, which is a continuation to the next part of the Gemara, is this. Now this prohibition kicks in only. The last thing I just said kicks in on Shabbos itself. The next problem kicks in even before Shabbos. If ain't tomnu, we cannot do Hatmanah, we cannot wrap bedavar hamosef hevel va'afilmi be'ojo. Why did Chazal tell us that from before Shabbos we cannot wrap the challah, the soup, etc., in a material that increases heat? Like I said, the Gemara says like the olive pulp or the lime or other materials that are not in our regular supermarket nowadays, but these things which actually increase heat. And that the Gemara says, Rava says, because we're afraid that you might come to use a material called remetz, reish mem and the tzadi. Remetz is the leftover coal at the bottom of the oven, and there are some live embers still left in that coal. So it's very hot, and we're afraid if you use that, it's a great insulator, it can wrap the whole pot and keep it very warm. But since there are still some live embers in the pot, we're afraid that if it's insulated in that from before Shabbos, you might come to stoke those coals, you might come to get those coals to be a little more hot over Shabbos by just playing with them a little bit, and that's going to be igniting a fire, and that'll be a Shabbos prohibition. So again, to recap, we have two distinct prohibitions. One from that starts already from Friday afternoon or any time on Friday. The point is, from before Shabbos, if I wrap up the pot before Shabbos in a material that increases the heat, that is usher as long as obviously if I leave it into Shabbos. I mean, let's just take an example from it. If I 12 o'clock Friday afternoon, take my cholent pot and I for some reason wrap it in some chemical heat type of material, there's lime, olive pulp, whatever it is, and then right before Shabbos I unwrap it, of course I did not transgress any Shabbos prohibitions, you can enjoy your cholent over Shabbos. If you wrapped it in this type of material that increases the heat from before Shabbos and leave it going into Shabbos, that's a rabbinic transgression because we're afraid you might come to stoke the coals because some of these materials have live embers in them. That's prohibition number one. Prohibition number two is once Shabbos already starts, I cannot wrap my food, cholent, soup, etc., to keep it hot, even in a material that does not increase heat and only maintains the heat. That's the basic Gemara in a nutshell. Two prohibitions, but again, from before Shabbos, I could wrap my soup pot in a regular towel, a regular non-increasing heat material, a regular towel, blankets, etc., and leave that. We'll see there might be some exceptions to that in a moment, but at this point, the prohibition from before Shabbos is something which increases the heat. The prohibition on Shabbos is on something that even maintains the heat. That's the Gemara. Now, so far not the most practical set of halachos for our contemporary kitchen because we don't usually have lime, olive pulp, other materials that increase the heat. So let's take it to the next level now. So now, what's another example of something which might be a little more relatable, which might increase the heat? So let's say you have our modern day blech, and let's just, again, we're not discussing how that came to be, why that's acceptable, but that's acceptable, we're all going to assume that for now. You have your fire on your range, you have the blech on top, and you have your chicken soup on top. And your wife is nervous that she left the flame on a little too low, and by the time you come home, after you've davened the long Kabach Friday night davening, you've had the Mishnah Shiur, you've done lots of things, taken Shabbos to the whole shul and everybody else who went to other shuls, by the time you get home, your chicken soup won't be that hot because the flame's not big enough. So she wants to wrap the pot and leave it on top of the flame. So she's wrapping it in a towel. Let's discuss it in a minute. Hold on. When she might want to do this. But the material she's using to wrap is a towel, so technically, if she does that before Shabbos, it should be permissible, because it doesn't increase the heat. But she's leaving the pot on top of the blech, on top of the fire, where it's hot, an active heat source. So there, the halachas is machlokes rishonim, but the Shulchan Aruch paskins, in such a case, we're going to view the towel as a mosif hevel, as something which is increasing heat. Even though, we said a moment ago, the towel by itself just maintains heat, but since it's an active heat source now, the hot plate or the blech, whatever the situation is, that's going now to be a problem from even before Shabbos. So Friday at 4 o'clock, an hour before Shabbos, she wraps up the chicken soup, puts it on top of the blech, and leaves it on going into Shabbos. The blech is still on going into Shabbos. That's going to be a problem. Why? Because now that is a modern day Mosif Hevel. That towel became now a material which is considered to be increasing the heat. Again, even though the towel by itself doesn't do that, but since there's an active heat source on the bottom, that's going to be a problem. That's the Shulchan Aruch paskins. Now, how do we avoid this? Now we're going to discuss, let's just a little preface 1 second. Even though Chazal asked the Hatmanah, the wrapping from before Shabbos, or wrapping on Shabbos, even if the matter is not Mosif Hevel, even if the matter you're wrapping it with does not increase the heat, we're going to find in the poskim many exceptions to this halacha, and as we go along, we'll try to explain, hopefully towards the end, why we're always looking for exceptions. Why, if the rabbis told us, I was learning yesterday with Rav Hirsch Chaim, the basic ideas over here, and he said, what do you mean? The rabbis told us Hatmanah is usher, why are we looking for loopholes? Why are we looking for ways that we can do Hatmanah? Why are we looking for ways to have our cake and eat it too? Right? Why don't we just say the rabbi said Hatmanah is usher? Because like the Gemara said, we're afraid you might come to heat up the pot, you might come to stoke the coals. Why are we trying to find a way where it's mutter? Stay tuned to the end. Now, so let's discuss.
Not have our cake, have our hot soup.
Hot soup also, right? Hot chicken soup, right? Or you want to have a hot chocolate cake at the end, you know? All right. So one piece of advice the Shulchan Aruch says at first, how do we avoid Hatmanah? So again, let's just discuss this case of the chicken soup on the blech, and the housewife wants to wrap it up to make sure it stays really piping hot for Friday night. So we said it's going to be a problem because the fire underneath is going to make the towel now act as a mosif hevel. So one way to avoid this problem, says the Shulchan Aruch, is to make sure the blanket, the towel around it, does not hug tightly, does not snug around the pot. Because Hatmanah, the definition of Hatmanah, wrapping something up, is up close and personal. It must be snug around it completely. Therefore, says the Shulchan Aruch, I'll use this for my visual aid. Let's say this is your pot. Imagine this was a round shape. And you take a wide lid and put it on top of the pot, larger than the pot. A typical lid fits the circumference of the pot, right? You take a wider lid and then you drape a towel around the wider lid. So what you have is a towel really just draped loosely over the pot. It's not snugly against the walls. So then that will be permissible. Even though it's on top of the fire. So we said before a minute ago that if you have a towel on top of the fire, the towel now becomes a mosif hevel. But since over here the towel is not snugly around the pot, although it might help, give you a couple degrees, maybe a degree or two more, whatever it is, in the heat, since it's not the way Chazal said, which is Hatmanah, means to be enwrapped, which means, again, snugly around, Shulchan Aruch says it's permissible. So this is one eitzah, how to get around this problem. You have the chicken soup on the... Now, this would be allowed even on Friday night. Why? Because even though we said a moment ago that once Shabbos starts, we cannot wrap anything completely, but since over here it's not completely wrapped, it's loose, it's just kind of draped over the pot, that would be allowed. That's permissibility number one. Permissibility number two, the Shulchan Aruch says, I'm just paraphrasing what's in source number two. For those who want to look through it and read it, you can read it and hopefully tell me if I'm speaking it out correctly. The second case the Shulchan Aruch says over here is, I don't know exactly, maybe in our mind it's hard to envision this, but if I have, let's say, a pot in the oven, I have my chicken in the oven is off, let's say, but it's residual heat still left there from before Shabbos, and I'm afraid that the heat's going to escape too fast so that the chicken will be cold by the time it comes to serve Friday night. I can take a blanket or it might need a really large blanket for this one, and wrap up the whole oven to keep the whole oven warm. Because in this case, although it may be even snug against the oven, around the oven, but the pot that's inside it is loose. The pot or the pan of food in the oven is not in direct contact with the insulating material. Anytime you have food in an oven, forget about wrapping it for a minute. Anytime you have food in an oven, why is it not a problem of Hatmanah? It's surrounded on all sides by heat, and the answer to that is very simply because it's not snugly against it. Even if you have a tightly packed oven, there's lots of airspace, and it might be, again, we're not discussing any halachas here of the permissibility of allowing the food to be in the oven before Shabbos or putting the food back in the oven. That's a whole different discussion. We're discussing only here one halacha of Hatmanah, wrapping food. Any food in an oven, in the cavity of the oven, is never considered to be wrapped because it's just in the loose airspace of the oven. And therefore, if I enwrap the whole oven, somehow I mummify the whole oven and wrap it all around, even if now it's going to keep an extra 10 degrees warmer, that's also going to be permissible because it's not up close and personal, it's not snugly against the food. That's so far two exceptions to this halacha. Alpi derech drush, I thought this fits in very well with Rashi in Parshas Toldos. Rashi at the end of Parshas Toldos tells us, makes a cheshbon of all the years of Yaakov Avinu's life. How old when Yishmael died, how old Yaakov Avinu was, and when he ran away to Lavan's house, all types of mathematical calculations, figuring out all the years. Very fascinating, great Rashi. Rashi there puts in the middle, and for 14 years, the Yaakov was mutman, the base Aver, when he was hidden in the house of the yeshiva of Shem, or Aver, there Shem was nifta at that point. Those years, he makes a consideration how to figure out those 14 years. But the word Rashi used from Chazal is mutman. He was hidden. That's the idea. When a yeshiva bachar is in yeshiva, he's mutman. He's protected from the rest of the world. He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't care. He shouldn't care what's going on. He's completely surrounded and enveloped by the walls of the yeshiva. Yaakov Avinu was mutman in base Aver 14 years. Hatmanah is defined when something is completely and snugly wrapped in and oblivious to anything that's going on around. There's no airspace for anything in between. Okay. Moving on. Yeah. A cocoon. Okay, that's good. Moving on to another exception for Hatmanah, and this is going to be crucial when we get to more practical cases as we go along. This is in source number 3 on the second page. This is actually a halacha not in the Shulchan Aruch discussing Hilchos Hatmanah. He's actually discussing here the halachas of how to keep food on the fire from before Shabbos. And then he throws in a certain halacha about Hatmanah. From the bracketed area on source 3 where it's bracketed off the second line, he discusses, he says, Aval Hatmanah al gabe gecholim, if you have Hatmanah on top of the coals, says the Shulchan Aruch, divrei hakol aser. So again, let's keep in mind, we're talking about the old Talmudic ovens, or in times of the Rishonim as well, some type of kira was called, and the bottom of the oven was laid with coals, hot embers. And you would take your pot, in this case, and stick it, and it would be partially submerged into the coals. So let's just say the bottom quarter, or the bottom fifth of the pot, whatever it was, would be submerged in the coals. That would be very hot, and would keep the pot hot. Okay, that's a great heating element. The problem with that is that it's submerged into the coals. Says the Shulchan Aruch, that's also called Hatmanah, and that's going to be Aser. So here, even though only, let's just say for argument's sake, 20% of the pot is covered in the coals, 80% of the pot is revealed. You can see it's very clear. But since 20% of the pot is submerged into coals, and in the poskim that's called Hatmanah b'miktas, a partial Hatmanah, says the Shulchan Aruch, that's prohibited.
On Shabbos or before Shabbos?
From even before Shabbos. Now, however, says the Ramah, and this is crucial, the Ramah is going to save the day for us, and it brings the other Rishonim who argue in the Shulchan Aruch and say, the Yesh Omrim, the Ramah says, even if the pot is literally on top of the fire, as long as part of the pot on top, the Ramah doesn't give us a percentage exactly, but we'll just say for now, a portion of the pot on top is revealed. So again, you have your pot, it's 20% submerged in the coals, like we said before, according to Shulchan Aruch. That's called Hatmanah, and that's going to be Aser from even before Shabbos to leave the pot in those coals. Comes along the Ramah and says, no, Hatmanah b'miktas, partial submersion and partial enwrappment on the bottom is not considered Hatmanah, and that's going to be mutter. Now, there's a side problem to deal with in this case, which we're not going to discuss right now, is how to get this pot properly out of the coals, because it's wedged in coals. The coals are muktzah, you might come to ignite them. That's a technical detail, how to get it out. We're not discussing that right now. We're discussing particularly the idea of Hatmanah, of wrapping. Says the Ramah that since most of the pot, or a significant portion, or any part of the pot, the Ramah actually doesn't say the word majority, the Ramah says as long as part of the pot is out of the coals, it's only Hatmanah b'miktas, only partially submerged, partially wrapped on the bottom. That's not called Hatmanah, and it's going to be mutter.
There'd be even the top part of the pot.
As long as part of the pot
walls, is not, even if all the walls are covered, but there's no lid.
Perhaps. That's why Rabbi Florence is asking, let's say you have 90% of the pot, right, 100%. Up to the lid, or 100% of the pot, but well, not the 100% because the lid is exposed. Perhaps the simple reading of the Ramah would agree with you, but we'll get to that more shortly. Right? That the Ramah seems to say that as long as some part of the pot is revealed, it's not considered to be wrapped, and it's mutter. Now the question is, we, B'nai Ashkenaz, we follow the Ramah. The Ramah says that's the minig. Great. What about the Sfardim? In this case, what does a Sfardi do? Someone who usually follows the Psak of the Shulchan Aruch, as the Sfardim usually do they have the right here to go with this minig that the Ramah says or not? And this is a great shiur on itself, and the idea of how minig comes in play when it goes up against halacha. But particularly for this question, so I've been seeing Abba Shol, which is in source 4, it was a great Sfardi Paisik of the last generation. I copied it from him. Chacham Ovadia and Shuvah says the same idea as well in a similar way. But the idea here is that even though the Sfardim are always bound and go after the words of the Shulchan Aruch, wherever there's an established minig, the Sfardim have the right to go with the minig, even if it's against the words of the Shulchan Aruch. Now, it's a question what establishes a minig. You can't just have every Yankel Shmerald establishing what the minig is, but if there's a properly codified minig and has halachic basis, even the Sfardim can go with it. So here too, the Sfardim can have their chamin or their cholent, even if it's partially submerged from before Shabbos, based on this psak, that since this is the halachically sanctioned minig, the Sfardim can follow it as well, even though the Shulchan Aruch seemingly paskin is not like that. Okay, so far we spoke out a couple of exceptions to Hatmanah. So again, just to break it up, we have two basic categories of Hatmanah: wrapping up food in a manner which increases the heat, which is also even from before Shabbos, and then we have wrapping food in something which just maintains heat, which is only also on Shabbos. We said though, even something which only maintains heat, if there's an active heat source on the bottom, like the fire from the blech or the hot plate, that would also be a problem of Hatmanah b'mosef hevel, because now, even though there's only a towel on it, it's like it's increasing the heat because there's active heat source on the bottom. We said though, if there's a wide lid on top, so the towel is just draped over the pot, that's not considered Hatmanah. Or if you just insulate the whole oven, that would not be Hatmanah. And then we said also, if something is only partially covered, so let's say you have this towel on the case of the chicken soup on the blech. So you cannot make the towel snug around the chicken soup. One way we said around this is just simply to make it very loosely draped, to have a wide cover on top. Another eitzah now is to not wrap the whole pot, just wrap 80% of the pot, 75% of the pot. Whatever, you can wrap a large portion of the pot, and it'll help keep it warm, even though it's on top of the heat source. It's not considered to be hatmanah b'mosif hevel, and so which is increasing heat, because the Ramah says, and that's our minig, that if it's not completely enwrapped, that's not considered to be hatmanah.
Okay, so then, if you want to take out the chon,
right? You could take out the chon. Now you have, let's say you have your chon on top of the blech, and it's wrapped up 80%, let's say, in the towel. You can, no problem, you could uncover that on Shabbos, take out your chon. Now, I didn't speak out this halacha, but the halacha is, if I have, even if it was completely wrapped, let's change your example for a minute. Let's just take a different example and go back to your case. Let's say I have a pot off the fire, and I completely wrapped it up before Shabbos in a towel. That's 100% permissible. And I left it on my countertop, or I left it anywhere in a safe place, and now I serve the soup Friday night, and then I have a guest coming in another hour. So the halacha is, if I wrapped something properly before Shabbos in a halachically sanctioned way, and I unwrapped it, the halacha is I'm allowed to completely rewrap it on Shabbos, because I'm just continuing what I did from before Shabbos in a permissible fashion. But in this case, where you only wrapped it 80%, that's mutter on Shabbos anyway, according to the Ramah. So even if I took my chalm pot was on top of the blech, the fire was on, and Friday night I took the chalm and I uncovered it, I took off the blanket. The blanket was only on 80%, right? And then I took my Friday night chant and I fulfilled all the ways how to properly put the chant back onto the fire, which we're not discussing right now. The tanai, all the conditions we need to put the chant back on. But let's say you fulfilled all those conditions, I can put that towel back on as well, up to, meaning not fully wrapped like it was before. That'll be permissible, because that's not considered the rabbinically restricted hatmanah, because it's not completely wrapped up. We're going to get to in a moment a little bit more about where Florence was asking before. Let's say just the top is uncovered and things like that.
But I thought you can't take out of the pot while it's on the fire.
Oh, sure, you're 100% correct. I'm not discussing those halachas. Anything of dealing with the shihiyah, of leaving it on the fire or putting it back on the fire, that's a different conversation. We're focusing particularly on one aspect of halacha, of the covering of it, the wrapping it up. Okay, now, here comes the next exception to the rule. Again, so on Shabbos itself, we're not allowed to completely enwrap the food, even if it's only maintaining the heat, if it's completely wrapped up. Let's say you want to wrap up the food, not because you want to keep the chicken soup hot, but because before Shabbos you saw a little creepy crawler walking around your kitchen in the name of Mendel the Mouse, or something like that, and a famous comic strip, and he was looking around for some food, foraging around your kitchen before Shabbos, and you're afraid if you're not going to properly cover all your food and seal it, the mice or your little children might come along and take some of that food. So I want to wrap it up, not because I necessarily need to keep it hotter. I'm happy with the heat level of my soup. I'm wrapping it up only because, for an ulterior motive, to protect it from this dirt. There's construction going on in my house. There's a lot of paint dust all over the place. I don't want the paint getting into my food, the dust, or my neighbor's doing construction, or there's mice. Whatever the reason is, I'm doing it for an alternative purpose than keeping the food warm. The Shulchan Aruch paskins as well that is permissible. So I can go ahead and I can fully enwrap the food on Shabbos if my whole intention is only to protect it from something else, not because I need to increase the heat. Even though I might get the side benefit, that's the Mishnah speaks out in number 6 in the source over here. Even though, on page 2 on the bottom in source 6, even though the Mishnah says there is some insulation happening with this material that I'm using, but since the purpose is to protect it from other factors, other conditions that are threatening my food, it's permissible. Now, a classic example of this, I'm sure you're all thinking of this, is when you want to wrap food to put it into your cholent before Shabbos. Some people like to have a hot piece of kugel or kishka Shabbos morning. So what do? They wrap up their kugel or their kishka and they put it into the cholent before Shabbos. Now, forget about where the cholent is located, and then if it's on the crack part of the blech, that's not relevant to this conversation. But submerging this food completely wrapped before Shabbos in a heat source, the cholent pot might be a problem, because there's an active heat source, whether it's electric or a fire, pumping into this cholent pot. If I stick food into it and completely submerge it before Shabbos, perhaps that would be a problem of hatmanah. But we're following the line of thinking, because it's completely wrapped, the food is wrapped, I'm going to submerge it completely in the cholent, cholent, so it's completely wrapped in food. A warming material, an insulation material doesn't have to be a blanket or a towel or anything like that. I can insulate food in food, theoretically, if the food is right, that could be a form of insulation. So here the post can discuss, could I completely wrap, let's have a piece of potato kugel, I want to have my potatoes and meat from the cholent on one part of my plate, I want to have a piece of potato kugel that's hot on my other other part of my plate. I don't want them to mix. I don't want my kugel to fall apart of my cholent. So there are many posts can say that since the whole purpose of me wrapping the kugel in the cholent is merely to protect it, so it shouldn't fall apart in the cholent, it shouldn't just completely disintegrate and get lost in the cholent mush. So therefore, many posts can say like this halacha, it'll be permissible to wrap the kugel or the kishka, whatever it is, completely and submerge it in my cholent. Even though it should be a problem, it should be a red flag because of hatmanah, of wrapping, since the whole idea is the reason why I'm wrapping is just to protect it from the cholent overpowering it and overtaking it, that'll be permissible. However, there are some poskim who raise issue with that exact example I said, and therefore many poskim suggest, for a variety of reasons, I'll just say it like this now, that you leave it partially opened so you can have that ramah we said before, if the food is not completely covered, so that it'll be permissible. So again, the best case thing to do if you want to put kugel in your cholent before Shabbos, you can wrap it in silver foil, leave it partially exposed, and therefore you fulfilled the sheet of the ramah like we said before. If it's not fully enwrapped, there's no problem with hatmanah either.
It can't be submerged in the cholent all the way. Because then it's covered by the cholent all the way.
Okay, you're right, fine, fair enough. Something has to be sticking out. Right, you're right.
So when you say exposed, you're not just talking about the aluminum.
You're correct. The silver foil will be partly opened.
Yes.
Right? Let's say the size of a penny, just for argument's sake, whatever, a quarter size, whatever it is, right? And, that part shouldn't be sunk into the bottom of the pot.
Right.
Fair enough.
And it makes no difference if that kishka is cooked already or you want.
Right, we're not discussing cooking here. We're not discussing any other prohibition besides
it's ready to
hatmanah.
eat before you put it in.
Yeah, it's fully cooked. All this hatmanah always talking about could be even fully cooked food. Right? We're not talking about
Solid and liquid make a difference in hatmanah?
They might. In what case? Meaning, let's say a classic shayla comes up also, right? If I want to take a baby bottle and heat it up on Shabbos, one of the classic easiest ways to do it is to submerge it into a cup of water, right? Now, there's many ways to avoid this problem. The easy way to avoid this problem is if the bottle is not completely submerged in the hot water, that will be okay, because again, it's not completely wrapped. Well, there are other reasons why I'm mutter as well, but I'm saying in a simple sense, if I just put the baby bottle in a cup of hot water and it's just floating, or even if it's halfway down, the Ramah said before, if it's not completely wrapped, it's mutter. Even if, let's say the baby bottle is only half full, and let's say all the liquid of the baby bottle is surrounded by the hot water, but the top half of the baby bottle is exposed from out of the hot water, that would also be okay. And the Ramah said before that as long as part of the pot is exposed, that's not considered hatmanah. That's even if the part of the pot that doesn't have food is exposed. Okay, let's talk about a couple other examples. So the post can discuss the shaila of a thermos. Can I take hot water from the urn? The urn's a kli rishon, and put it into a thermos on Shabbos. Would a thermos be considered insulating the food on Shabbos? Right? You don't know the basic structure of a thermos. It's very thick walls. Sometimes even a double canister in there, the way it's made, but it's built to be one kli. Would that be a problem of hatmanah or not? Now, surprisingly enough, there are some poskim who are machmir and say that it will be a problem. However, the consensus of Moshe Feinstein and other poskim as well is that it's not a problem for numerous reasons. One of the reasons is that because when I put the food in, when I put the liquid in the thermos, it's not considered hatmanah because the top is open. How else do I get the food in the thermos? And then when I put the lid on, it's not a problem because it's considered kli sheni. Another halacha we didn't speak out yet is that hatmanah is only usher when I'm wrapping the food in its original kli, in a kli rishon, or it doesn't have to be its original kli. In a kli though, that's direct contact with the fire. If I take my cholent, let's say for argument's sake, and put it into another pot, so now it's in a kli sheni, and then on Shabbos I want to wrap that up. Okay, let's give an example. I dished out the cholent Shabbos morning, and for whatever reason I can't put the cholent back onto the blech. I didn't fulfill those qualifications necessary to put the cholent back, and I forgot that I have another guest coming in a half hour. I don't want to serve him cold cholent, so what can I do? One way what you could do is you could take any cholent that's left in the pot, put it into a second pot, and then completely wrap up that pot in a towel. even though completely wrapping something in a towel on Shabbos should be prohibited, that's Hatmanah. But if it's in a Kli Sheni, the chal now is in a second Kli, that will be permissible. That's the Shulchan Aruch Paskins. So a thermos as well, according to consensus of Gedolei HaPoskim, is going to be mutter as well. Another problem that comes up, it's not so common anymore, but I still remember this as a child, we had one of these at home, and they used to be common. In the old urns, where you had just a spigot on the bottom, not the pump pots, many of the people from the generation or two before me wouldn't drink from it on Shabbos because the water wasn't hot enough. They needed to burn the palate of your mouth when you drink a hot tea. So those urns just aren't hot enough. So somebody invented that you can invent this. The old bubbies used to crochet, they used to knit, and now you can have a knitted, beautiful, decorative urn cover on Shabbos. It's a great idea theoretically because it keeps the water very warm. The problem though is that what's happening here? The urn is considered to have an active heat source. The electricity is constantly pumping in. If I put an insulating matter around the urn before Shabbos, even if it's only a crocheted urn cover or a towel or anything like that, it's davar she'eina mosef hevel, but it becomes a mosef hevel. The towel becomes a mosef hevel because there's an active heat source pumping heat into the urn the whole Shabbos. So the way around this problem is that to make sure it doesn't completely cover the whole urn. If the urn cover doesn't completely come down to the canister where the water is hot, or it's somehow exposed on top, whatever, you could figure out a solution to it, but that would avoid the problem of Hatmanah. Otherwise, if it's completely wrapped up, even though the towel itself is considered to be Eina Mosef Hevel, but since there's an active heat source there, the towel now becomes a Mosef Hevel.
But just putting a towel on, it seems like I walked into the kitchen and saw a towel on top of my urn. That would be okay because it's not all the way down.
Right, it's draped loose, presumably also
just on top.
Just on top, right? It's not snug, up close against, tight against the thing. Now there might be another concern there. If someone takes a wet towel on Shabbos, we're not discussing that, Shaila, and you want to dry it, that'll be another problem of concern of bishul. You're cooking the water that's in the towel. That's another problem. Okay, another case that comes up is, let's say you realize Shabbos morning you forgot to take a challah out of the freezer. So there's panic. It's 11 o'clock Shabbos morning. It's pandemonium. Your wife runs to the freezer, gets out a delicious challah, but it's frozen. It's rock solid. So you got to think quick. So
wait, what time did she pull it out of the freezer?
11 o'clock Shabbos morning, and you're eating 11:30. You're hungry. You're not waiting till 1 o'clock to have Shabbos Suda. You want to eat 11:30, 11:15 maybe, right? You want to get moving, right? And the challah is frozen solid. So what are you going to do? You'll put it on top of the challah pot. You'll put it wherever. You'll figure out a warm place to put it. But if you leave it there, exposed, on top of, let's say, the challah pot, it's going to take a good half hour, 45 minutes till it gets thawed out properly. So, perhaps you're thinking what you want to do is, you're going to wrap it in silver foil. If it's in silver foil, aluminum foil, and that might help speed up the process. Now that's a potential problem, because what you're doing is you're completely wrapping up a challah, completely wrapping it up in davar she'eina mosef hevel, right? Aluminum foil doesn't add heat, but you've completely insulated something and putting it in a spot, an active heat source, which will now be a problem of Hatmanah on Shabbos, perhaps. Yeah, it's hot enough. Yeah, let's assume yes for a minute. So let's make it hot enough on top of the blech, somewhere hot, right?
The same situation with the blech?
Yeah, potentially it's a problem if the challah is completely wrapped. So one easy solution out of this is not be completely wrapped. Like we said before, the Ramah says if part of the food is exposed or part of the pot is exposed, it's not a problem of Hatmanah. So wrap it up, let's say 90% for argument's sake, leave part of the challah exposed, and you can have your challah kneaded too, right? Another way this might not be a problem is if you're not doing it necessarily for heat. I'm not so familiar with the intricacies of in and out of the kitchen, but when we learned this in the Kail in the morning, one of my charushas argued with me for a while about this. He says, no. The reason why you wrap challah when you want to heat it up Shabbos morning, let's not have the scenario I said before, not 11 o'clock. You're not down to the wire. It's 8 o'clock Shabbos morning, your wife takes a challah out of the freezer. It has plenty of time to defrost. But she wants to serve it warm for the Suda. Mm-hmm. So she'll warm it up on top of the hot plate, etc., wherever it's permissible to warm it up. Okay? But if you leave it on the hot surface for too long of a time, it dries out the challah. So you want to wrap up the challah in aluminum foil so that it doesn't dry up. So here, why are you wrapping it? Not because you need the extra heat per se, you just want it that it keeps in the moisture. So that will be a fulfillment of this halacha that I'm wrapping it. Why? Not because of the mice, but because I need it for an alternative purpose, alternative reason of keeping in moisture. So even though it's completely wrapped up and it's on top of an active heat source, since the whole reason why I'm wrapping it is just to keep in the moisture, not to make it hot or anything like that, according to some poskim, that'll be permissible as well.
So the frosting method is okay too. Just putting a half hour before.
Right, but we said if you're really putting the silver foil on just for the purpose of keeping the heat in better, right? Because you're in a rush, you only have a half hour to the meal. The chal, it's frozen brick, right? So then it might be, if you completely unwrap it and you put it on top of an active heat source, that might be a problem of now the wrapping became a mosif hevel, and now that you look at the wrapping to be something which is increasing the heat, that might be a potential problem. It's up for debate. So one simple solution to avoid it is based on the Ramah: just leave part of the challah partially exposed. Don't completely wrap it in the pre-cut aluminum foil. Leave part of the challah open. A pre-cut, of course, right? And you have your challah, and you'll have a nice warm challah, no problem.
But the best way is just wait and eat later.
Maybe you can wait, not everyone else can wait. Okay, now let's get to one of the most contemporary halachic questions about Hatmanah, which there's been much rabbinic literature about this, and we'll try our best in the rest of the time to discuss this. What about our crockpots? Right? There's two basic models of the crockpot. If you've ever been to Walmart or any other fine retailer, you'll see there's two basic ideas of how a crockpot works. There is the crockpot which just has a base on the bottom. It kind of works like a flat base. You put the pot on top of it. There's no walls or anything surrounding it. It's just a hot thing on the bottom. You put the pot on, and that's it. So that's a regular question of how you leave that pot on the fire from before Shabbos, putting it back on. All the blech questions, we're not discussing that right now. But that would not bring in any question of hatmanah, of wrapping, because the pot is not wrapped. The more common crockpot, one I think I have, many other people have, is a crockpot which has a ceramic pot which goes into a metal insert, which now surrounds most of the pot with an active heat element and is keeping the pot and shal nice and hot and cooking it. Is that considered to be hatmanah? Is that considered to be wrapping the food? Or is that considered to be cooking the food and not wrapping the food? And this is where the debate starts. So, Florence raised the point before, the top of the pot is exposed. Right. In this case as well. The crock pot, the way the ceramic pot works, it has a lid that keeps it, doesn't fall straight into the canister. Right. So you have, let's say, a small percentage of the pot above the canister, and you have the lid completely exposed. So, in Rav Vosner Zatzal, in the new edition that we have here in the shul, thanks to magnanimous donation of the tshuvas, thank you very much. So Rav Vosner here has a very fundamental tshuva where he writes, based on what Rav Florence said before, and others as well, that there is no problem with hatmanah here. We have a simple reading of the Ramah. The top of the pot is exposed. Again, you might need a blech, and you might need the other considerations, how to deal with the crock pot for other Shabbos considerations. You shouldn't avoid the bishul problems, etc. We're discussing particularly only the problem of hatmanah, of wrapping up the food. Says Rav Vosner, there's enough, the fact that the top of the pot is exposed, that's enough for a reason to allow it that it's not considered to be hatmanah. And again, if you have a blech in the pot, because you want to put it back on or whatever, it's not fully cooked before Shabbos, and the other reasons, that's okay also, but there'll be no problem of hatmanah. That's how Rav Vosner paskins, that's how Moshe Sternberg Shlita paskins as well, and Chuvas Van Haggis. They bring them from Steinberg as well. He passed that well, and Rav David Feinstein is quoted in the Sefer V'Dibar Tabam. He also quotes it over there that Rav Moshe held as well as only Pia Shmuel. There's no written, as far as I know, tshuva from Rav Moshe about this. Rav David Feinstein, quite a reliable source, says as well that Rav Moshe held that's not considered hatmanah. The top is exposed. Some even say because there's a little bit of airspace between the canister and the pot. That's questionable how much airspace it is, but some say that's enough airspace to make it, like we said before, that the hatmanah, the wrapping, is not personal, up close and personal, snugly against it. So that would also be a reason. So again,
the airspace is not so important because when you line it for the blech,
they take away, they kill the airspace. Okay, fine, but fair enough. But even without the airspace on top, we have a nice group of poskim who all say it's not a problem, and you can put your cholent in the crock pot before Shabbos. Again, all the blech questions for a different time, but it would not be a problem of hatmanah. However, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal and Rav Yashiv Zatzal were very hesitant to rely on this idea that just because the top of the pot is exposed, that would take away from any hatmanah concerns. And it's copied here. It's on source 8. It's quite lengthy. Rav Shlomo Zalman here. This is not from his own pen. It's from the Sefer Shulchan Shlomo, which is published after he passed away, from his Talmidim and his family members who gathered from things that they knew from his name or little notes that he had written to himself, but not necessarily from the tshuvas, not from the response that he had written. And they quote here that even though Shlomo Zalman was aware that other poskim said it's mutter, Shlomo Zalman was hesitant, and he felt, that this would be a problem of hatmanah since the majority of the pot besides the lid, is completely enwrapped by the canister of the crack pot. So even according to Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rabbi Yashiv, the simple solution to this is that you could take a rock or some aluminum foil balls, or someone told me they use like a very thin wrench. All these things, the point is they prop up the pot a little bit to be not completely submerged in the canister, so it's loose in the canister, so that again takes care of the problem of Hatmanah, because then not the whole pot is being enwrapped by the canister. So again, even according to the tzad to be machmer, like Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rabbi Yashiv Zatzal, as long as the pot is propped up, Rav Shlomo Zalman speaks out, a simple lining of the canister would not be sufficient. This meaning if you just line the pot with one layer of aluminum foil, that might be sufficient for a blech, but that won't be sufficient to take care of the problem of enwrapping the pot. So you have to prop it up again with some aluminum foil balls, some rocks, a wrench. Be your own inventor, figure out a safe way. Someone puts a tile on the bottom of it. Whatever the case is, you can figure out an invention how to prop up the pot. And this is an open machlokes, so we can consult a local Orthodox rabbinic authority for what the proper minig is in each locale. But that's the basic machlokes in a most prevalent Hatmanah question that comes up is banazeh. Now, going back to one of the questions that Hirsch Chaim raised before, is that why are we looking for ways to avoid Hatmanah? Chazal said Hatmanah is aser, so Hatmanah is aser. We're looking, well, if it's not fully enwrapped, if it's a little bit exposed, if it's loose, all these exceptions we're looking for. What do you mean? Chazal said Hatmanah is aser, let's be strict in it, and aser any type of enwrapment on Shabbos. So here there's a very crucial Ramah. The Ramah is quoting the Rishonim, and the Ramah writes as follows. This is in source number 9. He says, mitzvah lahatman l'Shabbos. It's a mitzvah to wrap up the food in a halachically sanctioned way from before Shabbos, kadei sheyochal chamim b'Shabbos, in order that we ensure that we have hot food on Shabbos. Ki zeho mikibud v'oinek Shabbos. This is a crucial aspect in honoring and giving importance to the day of Shabbos. V'chol mi, and anybody she'enay maimin b'divrei chachamim, anybody who doesn't believe in the words of the chachamim, v'oisra achilas chamin b'Shabbos, and says we can't eat hot food on Shabbos. Chazal, it's too complicated. All the halachas, or we'll see in a minute why. Chayshin and Shama Pikaris, who were afraid that maybe we have to check his lineage, because one of the first things that Sadukim, the groups, the original groups of those people who veered from the ways of Chazal, they said they read the Torah very literally, and they said the Torah says Lo Savaru Eish B'Chomosh V'Seichem B'Yom Shabbos, no fire in your house on Shabbos. That means no fire. Sit in the dark, have a morbid day. But that's how they looked at it. No fire means no light, means no ovens, means no heat. I don't know what they did in the winter, I have no idea. But they probably suffered terribly. And they held that you can't have hot shol on Shabbos morning. So there's a lot of problems with that, because I don't know what they ate, just peanut butter and jelly is a problem in itself. But so in order to make sure that we are not from that group of Jews that unfortunately did not follow the proper derech of Chazal, the Rishonim emphasize over and over again, it's coming from the Balamar, other Rishonim say similar Rishonim as well, that we must ensure that we have hot food on Shabbos. If we don't have hot food on Shabbos, check his lineage. However, the Mishnah Berurah adds that if someone is on a strict diet or for whatever other health concerns, he cannot handle the hot shal on Shabbos morning, we'll give him an excuse. Mishnah Berurah doesn't speak out. Other places can say, let him have a hot tea, let him have a hot coffee, and he can satisfy this obligation to have hot food on Shabbos as well. It doesn't say you have to have cholent, per se, you have to have something warm on Shabbos. Now, although the Mishnah Berurah paskins that if someone has difficulty with hot food, he could skip the cholent. However, there's a fascinating B'nai Yisachar. I'm not saying this the halacha l'maisa, I'm just telling you something to take into consideration, which is the last source. B'nai Yisachar in Mamarei HaShabbos quotes a medrash. He says, the medrash in Bereshis Rabbah says, in the first line over here in Yud, because of the istanim, because of the feinschmeckers, because of the people who can't deal with spicy foods, I guess, or things that are too, delicate people we'll call them. That's why Shabbos is blessed. That's why Shabbos is blessed with tasty food. And he goes on where it's underlined, I pointed out, he says, the Machal Shabbos, if you would take a cholent and put it up Monday night and eat it Tuesday afternoon for lunch, besides the fact it wouldn't taste so good because it's Tuesday, but it might give you a bad stomachache, says the B'nai Yisachar. Leaving food out for prolonged periods of time with even though they're being heated properly, it's just not good. You come to a restaurant at the end of the day, you have those hot dogs that are going the whole day on the rollers, right? They're just not good. They're not good for you, right? But Kam Shabbos, says the B'nai Yisachar, and that's a special bracha of Shabbos. He says, Kivan Shem Nitimonim l'Shabbos, I mean from its underlined in the middle, since they were wrapped properly for Shabbos, are kept hot for Shabbos, Shayra Behem HaBracha, they bestowed upon them a special blessing, Shiur Muvusamim V'tamam, they're blessed with good flavor, Ki Ma'adonei Malachim, like a king's plate. Arevim lenefesh l'guf, they're good for your soul and for your body. It says, whoever believes the words of Chachamim will know this and experience this and will not have any problem with it at all. Even people who are weak physically won't have a problem with it. He says, however, those people who are exposed to the ways of the world and are going after the philosophical ideas and they can't handle all the words of Chazal, so for them it's going to be piercing their soul. This food is not going to be good for them and they're not going to enjoy it on Shabbos. So according to Bnei Yissaschar from Little Chassidish Torah, if you're really Chassidish, you got to have cholent on Shabbos. It's a mitzvah. If you don't have cholent on Shabbos, you got to check your yichus. As long as, again, you have properly warmed it up in a halachically suitable way, it's good for our guf, it's good for our neshama, and we shall be zeicha to the Gula Shleivim here be amazing.
The question is, will the Bnei Yissaschar extend that when you eat shalom?